Hello and welcome back to another episode of League Talk. Today we're going to be taking another traditional sports coaching ideology and applying it to League of Legends. This is something that I do every day in my job when I coach sports and when I'm developing the business that I'm working on. So today's topic is going to be about repetition. Now, repetition, super simply put, is just doing something over and over again. Now, this is something that is going to be really, really important for traditional sports coaching, which is obviously applied to League. Now, when repetition is used, it's for taking a skill from the conscious, which is when you're thinking about doing something and thinking about the skill that you're doing, what to do and when to do it, and then moving it to the subconscious. And this is where you no longer need to comprehend what you are doing. You simply execute. Now, this is used mainly in tennis, and this is where it comes from. And this is where the basic coaching ideology comes from. This is sports psychology, this is sports science, this is sports coaching. The same three sort of ideas as the last episode applied once more. But when we're doing tennis coaching, one of the really big things that we do is we do something called basket feeding. Now for the younger children, it's not so important. But for those who have little tweaks in their game that are at a certain standard, that need to be improved just by little margins, or they need to learn a completely new skill, that basket feeding is brilliant. And what that is, you literally just get a bucket or basket of balls, and you do the same skill over and over again. Now, it could be of a different focus, so you could be focusing on tweaking the skill a little bit. So it might be that your racket needs to drop a little bit lower to brush up the back of the ball for a forehand, or it could be that your serve needs to be learned. You need to learn how to do a serve, which is a really big skill. But basically, repetition means that the skill becomes easier, and through repetition, you can improve the skill as you can understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and make it into a fine motor skill. Now, a motor skill is basically an action. That's super simply, it is just an action to do with your body, but it tends to refer, and what I'm going to refer to a motor skill as, is an action that's stored into memory. It's something that's subconscious. And then a fine motor skill is to do with finer movements, so it could be your fingers, whilst a gross motor skill is going to be something to do with your legs, your arms, so it could be jumping is a gross motor skill, or a squat is a gross motor skill comparative to throwing a dart, which is a fine motor skill. One really important little side note, and I won't touch on this for the rest of the episode, but when you're using repetition and using the techniques that I give and why it's important and how you should implement it into your game, what is really important is you don't cram repetition. So you do it for a certain set of time, maybe an hour, maybe 45 minutes, maybe 3 games if you want to really push it that far. But those 3 games spread across a day. It's really important you don't do like 4 or 5 hours of cramming before something important's coming up. So it's important you don't cram learning Sejuani for 4 hours before you play 6 hours later. That would be cramming, and that's not particularly useful. So try to avoid cramming when using this technique of repetition. So a lot of people will ask questions such as, why is repetition important and how can it actually help me? How can it lead to success? Repetition can do a bunch of different things, but we're going to touch on some finer points and then get into why exactly we should be doing it and the end. So once you've repeated it loads and loads and loads, once you've got it, then what happens? But what I'm going to go over first is the important things to do with repetition that can lead to success. Now, repetition can increase confidence. That's one really, really big point, and confidence can equal motivation sometimes. But you could be thinking something along the lines of, I've played Sejuani a lot, and I've repeated how to team fight with her over and over. I know now how to execute this properly. That could be one train of thought. That is a confidence booster. You now feel confident on that champion. The next point is it can increase skill. So whether that be your ability to understand when to engage on Sejuani, we're going to keep this idea of Sejuani going through part of this episode. It could be when to engage and you understand that now, or even your ability to hit a certain skill shot. So your W on Sejuani is a bit of an interesting one. It's sort of a semicircle and then a straight line. So it could be that you now understand how to properly use your W to make sure you get both stacks of the Sejuani passive for the E. So it could be that. That's increased your abilities and your skill cap. It could increase focus and concentration. When you're practicing certain things and concentrating on finer details rather than larger details, your focus on one specific thing might increase. You might just get a better focus. Your concentration might increase. It's also a really good way to gauge success rates or to track your performance. One thing that can always be difficult with improvement is not seeing results when they really are there. For example, if we take something that I know really well, the gym and exercise, when I was working as a personal trainer and shadowing personal trainers at the gym that I was working at, one thing that a lot of personal trainers really like to do was to take progress photos. And the reason for that is, when you go to the gym, it can be really difficult to see improvements made on your own body, right? You have made, and that reason is because you look at it every single day. You're so used to looking at your body, and every day you look at it in the mirror or whatever. However, when you can gauge success, you can feel more motivated and feel happier when you are getting the results. So the fix for this, as I just mentioned, is to take before and after photos or progress photos. Because then you can see what you looked like at the inception of this gym program and the inception of this diet 4 weeks later, 2 weeks later, 6 months later. You can really see how your body progresses, as long as you're putting the right effort in, of course. But with repetition, you can see that you never used to be able to ward hop, for example. So that's applying that same logic to league. You could go from, I don't know how to ward hop, now through repetition, I know how to ward hop. And you can see that as long as you've stored the fact that you didn't have the ability to ward hop and now you do, in the same way that you've stored that progress photo from week 0 to week 4, that will make a lot of sense. Now, it's also really good for consistency. You simply become consistent because you're doing something over and over. That's how consistency is brought and how it is brought into one's game. You just do things and you do them so regularly that it becomes natural and it becomes a fine motor skill, linking back to what we were talking about earlier. One really important thing to think about with repetition is the idea of fun versus winning. Now, in league, it's really, really difficult because a lot of people want to have fun when they're playing, but fun comes from winning for some. Some people just really enjoy playing their certain champion, aren't particularly bothered at how the result goes and how the end game goes, which makes a lot of sense. It's just different motivations for playing the game. Some people play it competitively, some people don't. But the ideal is to win with fun. And that's the best option as adherence to the correct techniques and to the game in the right way will increase because of that, if you're winning and having fun at the same time. But repetition is very difficult because in traditional sports, this is normally used as a way to make skills become motor skills and make them into muscle memory. As I said earlier, repeating the forehand is very easy. You just get a bucket of balls and you hit forehand, forehand, forehand. In League of Legends, it's really difficult because you can't always do this in the same way. There is the practice tool, which is wonderful, but it's not always the right sort of game sense. You don't get the right application for it sometimes. Arguably, you can repeat this with aiming and hitting skill shots, but it is super difficult because every game is different. You might not always be playing a skill shot champion. You might go from Rammus to Ezreal, and all of a sudden that's a really big difference. Don't know why you go from Rammus to Ezreal. But one thing that I now want to touch on is how do we try and make things as similar as possible to make repetitions more frequent? Now, because League of Legends is always changing, as I just spoke about in that little section there, what we want to do is we want to try and make things as frequent as possible to make repetitions occur more often. So, one really simple way, and this is something that pro players and coaches back to the end of the world, is that playing the game is really important. That's why this 10 to 14 to 16 in some cases hour schedules of playing League of Legends is so important. You are just repeating. In essence, you're doing the same thing pretty much over and over again, just with little variances. So playing the game is one way that all pros and all pro coaches say is the best way to improve. So super simply, starting here and repeating the game over and over again is a really good place to start. But breaking it down further than that, obviously you can't just be like, play the game loads, job done. Practicing similar mechanics is going to be something that can be really good. So in the same way, if you practice the forehand lots, the swing is not too dissimilar from the swing of a backhand. Obviously you have a forehand, which is one hand. You start with the racket low and finish high. In the backhand, it's two hands, and this is tennis if you don't know, where you start with the racket low and finish high. It's slightly different, your elbows come nice and high. There's lots of different variances, but the swing in essence is similar. So practicing similar mechanical plays, such as Sejuani, and you do a Q ult, or you do a Shen E flash combo, or a Cassiopeia R flash combo. Or you could go into something like ward hops. You have a ward hop on Jax, you have a ward hop on Lee Sin. You could look at auto attack resets. For example, when you have Renekton and a Tiamat, the right combo to play, it might be auto Q, Tiamat, auto W, something along those lines, who knows? I'm not a Renekton player, so I can't give you the right example for that. The practice tool, again, is wonderful for this because you can practice ward hopping, you can practice the right combo for Renekton. But it's not always game applicable. You can't always apply the same things from a practice tool, i.e. you're using a dummy and your W's always going to hit because your dummy's not walking away on Renekton. So it doesn't always apply perfectly to the game. So the next thing is playing the same champion over and over. Now, if your focus, as we touched on earlier, isn't necessarily for fun, it's just for winning, this is the best strategy to win because you get really comfortable at one champion through repetition. However, this is really difficult because playing the same champion can be boring. If you play Sejuani over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, it's not particularly fun. You may want to throw an Elise in from time to time, maybe not recommended. And because you get bored, it can stop your improvement. The improvement arc can simply dip, and you can fly off the rails and end up playing Lee Sin. Fly off onto a different champion like Lee Sin, as I said, and suddenly you're a Lee Sin one trick with a 10% win rate. Probably not ideal. So maybe playing the same champion isn't the best option if you can't hack it and you're more focused on fun rather than wins. So playing the same champion, you get used to that champion, you get used to the right pathing. If you're a jungler, you get used to the way the lane works, you get used to trading with that champion, you get used to your zone of control, your auto attack distance, all of these sort of different things. But if you don't want to play the same champion over and over again, a good regression from that is to play the same style of champion. Now this is really interesting as this relates to something we spoke about in past episodes with the Q&A episode we did ages ago. If you want to watch that, you can find it. It's the first ever video on my YouTube, and it was a podcast as well, so just look down. It was a guy called Bloom, so it was Q&A with Bloom. But if you're looking to win and you're a really good tank player who knows how and when to engage, and you play top, then play top laners like Maokai, that's an engaging champion, like Sion, engaging champion, Shen, he can engage, or even Malphite, all engaging champions who know they have a very simple engage, the WR on a Maokai, it could be the ult for a Malphite, it could be ult for Sion with a Q. They may be great champions for you. And if you understand how and when to look for kills, and you really understand how to assassinate and attack the backline, then champions like Zed or Talon or LeBlanc might be perfect. So these are taking, and these are examples of playing similar champion styles, such as tanks or assassins. Now, whilst you're not continuously playing Sejuani for 40 games, you're playing Sejuani, Sion, Maokai, those sort of champions. So those are my 3 tips. It's practicing similar mechanics. It's playing a same champion, and if you don't want to play a same champion, try and find the playstyle that works for you and play champions around that playstyle. That form of repetition is going to be fantastic, as we're going to touch on at the end now. And this will all make sense as to why this is a really good idea. So the end. We've done the whole means to the end. We've practiced and practiced and practiced. We've repeated over and over again. And now you've got these skills as fine motor skills. Fantastic. You know how to properly hit a forehand, for example, in tennis, or you now know how to complete an inset kick on Lee Sin. But what else does repetition do? So obviously, as we touched on earlier, it can help you concentrate and things like that. But one really important thing is once you know how to play a champion, you've repeated their skills, their skill shots, their combos, their engages, their ults, all those sort of things, you can now concentrate on more and other important things. These tend to be more macro-based, so it could be things like vision, it could be warding, it could be team fighting, it could be pathing, lots of different things that you can focus on now that you really have repeated and created your fine motor skills as Lee Sin. Now what this does is it allows a building block without you really knowing, but now you can start adding things on top of everything you've been doing. So take it all the way back. So when you first started playing League of Legends, and when you were a beginner, or if you are a beginner, do you remember when you couldn't CS very well? I do. I couldn't CS very well, much like other people who start playing this game. Well, you practice that so much, and you're better at CSing now. Do you concentrate on CS? Probably not. That's probably not the first thing in your mind. You are concentrating on CS, but there could be other things. You could be concentrating on getting out the laning phase. You could be concentrating on poking your opponent. Well, you've practiced CSing now, and you could be at 100 CS at 12 minutes. That's amazing. That has become a fine motor skill, and now you CS without even thinking about it. Now, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to create more of those fine motor skills. So the great example is I don't think about CSing anymore. It just happens, right? So you try and CS as much as you can, you concentrate on making sure you get the CS, but it's not at the forefront of your mind. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that that inset kick becomes the same thing as CSing feels like now. So that is the end. We start building on top of things and always add in new things to try and better yourself and to challenge yourself and improve overall. So these are the fantastic ways to implement them. So that pretty much wraps up why repetition is going to be so important for League of Legends. What we did is we went over what repetition can achieve, what motor skills are, so taking things from your conscious, thinking about CSing, pushing it to your subconscious. I no longer think about CSing, it just happens. We understand what a fine and a gross motor skill is, and why repetition is important and can lead to success. Those were confidence, increasing skill, focus, concentration, success rates, tracking performance, and how good it is for consistency. We had a little caveat when it came to understanding the difference of fun versus just winning, and therefore how to make as many frequent repetitions as possible. So we spoke about practicing similar mechanics. So the Shen E flash, Casio R flash, those are very similar, so maybe those are things that you focus on. We spoke about playing the same champion as much as possible, and if not playing the same champion, playing the same style, so it could be an assassin or a tank. And then we understand why repetition is important by looking at how CS is something that used to be something we thought about a lot, and we were focusing on clicking on this minion, clicking on the minion at the right time, and now it's something that we just understand and it just happens. So I want to say thank you ever so much for listening. If you're listening, if you're watching, hello on YouTube. But this can be found on YouTube if you're listening to it on the podcast, and vice versa. This is on all major podcasting platforms. You're looking at Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. There's loads of different platforms this is on, all thanks to Anchor, which is a fantastic app. And it can also be found on YouTube, as I said, so it's league Talk on YouTube. All the links for everything is in the description below. So I hope you have a wonderful day. I'd really like to start this Q&A series again. I mentioned it in the last episode, so keep sending in questions if you guys have any. I'd love to be able to answer them. It could be on anything. It could be on the way that you mentally prepare for a game. It could be on coaching techniques. Any questions, I'd be more than happy to try and answer them in the best way possible. Bloom, who recently achieved his goal, was fantastic. So that's the sort of style of video. So have a look at the first ever video on this channel, and you can see how well Bloom's been doing. I believe he hit Grandmaster as well, so he's gone from applying some of the things that I talked to him about and some of the techniques that I asked him to employ, or advised him to employ, and he's done really, really well from it. So hopefully I can help as many people as I can. But thank you ever so much for listening. Try and get in contact with me at leaguE Talk on Twitter, leaguE Talk blog, and at league_talk on Instagram. I have a personal one, which is AJ_esports. So thank you ever so much for watching, and we will see you next time.